Hey guys, welcome back or welcome to my channel. If you're new here, today's video is going to be my June reading wrap up, my favorite video of the month because I go through all of the books that I read in that month. I give my rating, I give my thoughts, if I would recommend them, all of that good stuff. I read 10 books in the month of June, which is like my target number. I love when I hit an even 10 for the month, and anything above that is just a bonus, but 10 is the number that I look to achieve every month. And this month I incorporated some different forms of reading, some different types of books, some new genres to me, so it will be a very exciting wrap up in my opinion. Before we get into all of the books, I wanted to do a little breakdown, a little bit of a recap of what I read. So I read 3 thrillers this month, 2 romances, 2 fictions, 1 graphic novel, 1 memoir, and 1 historical fiction. That is way more diverse than my reading typically looks, so it was definitely a fun month. And when it comes to my TBR, I read 4 out of 6 of the books, which is also a success. I like to do like 3 or above, so like half of the books I put in my TBR or above. I haven't completed my TBR since March, so maybe in July I will complete it. If you want to see what books I plan on reading in July, I already have a video posted for that as well. Okay, without further ado, let's get into the books. I'm gonna try my very best to keep this short and sweet. I usually yap on and on and on, like I can't get myself to stop talking about these books, but I want to keep it brief and succinct and just get to the point this time. So this is gonna be me trying. The first book I read this month was Never Tell by Lisa Gardner, and we started off the month not so good with this book. I'm just gonna get right to the chase and tell you guys that I did not enjoy it. I gave it a 2.75 star, which is low for me. Like anything under a 3 star is pretty much I disliked the book, so I very much disliked this book. It was a mystery thriller who followed a woman who was found next to her dead husband with a gun in her hand, and he was shot dead, and so she is the prime suspect of his death, and she was also the prime suspect of her father's death decades earlier when she was also found in the same position holding a gun. He was shot dead. So she is now the suspect of 2 murders. She got off the first time. Is she gonna get off the second time? Did she murder either one of them? That is pretty much what this whole book was about. And I actually liked it at first. At first, I was like, wow, this book is getting right into it. It had me questioning things right from the beginning, which I really liked. But then it kind of got downhill from there. And another thing that I actually liked about this book was that it was very much like involved in the investigating and figuring out the crime, and kind of like a CSI show or Law and Order, Criminal Minds, you know, where you're very much investigating the crime, figuring out what happened. But then it got way in the weeds of that. Like too much was going on with figuring out the crime. Like they were DNA testing, they were walking through the process every single time. It kept feeling like they were going over the same evidence over and over and over again. Like I just got bored, and by the end I was not interested in the story at all. I was not on the edge of my seat. I did not care who did it. I didn't care what was going on. Like the twist happened and I literally was like blank face, no reaction, because the book just took so long to get there and got way too in the weeds along the way. This was just kind of one of those books that left me feeling like annoyed while I was reading it, so by the end I was fired up about like not liking it. So you know that that's like not really a good book. Like I was kind of hate reading it. Do you know what I mean? And also I did realize after I read this book that it is like the 10th book in a series. It's not like a connected series, it's standalone books and they just pretty much follow the same detective. But maybe that affected me not liking this book because it was like the 10th in a very much interconnected series. So that's my fault. I just picked this book off of my mom's shelf the last time I was home and I had no clue, but I wouldn't recommend. 2.75. Not the best. The next book I read was The 5-Star Weekend by Ellen Hildebrand, and this was actually one of the books on my June TBR that I did read, I did finish, so that was one of the 4 books out of 6 that I read. And I gave this book a 3.75 star rating. The way I would describe it is that I liked it, but I didn't love it. My main issue is that I found it a bit boring. Like, kind of, I had to force myself to pick it up every time I wanted to read. I wasn't dying to get back to the book, which is a sign for me, you know, not loving a book. And usually if I get that feeling, it's in the 3s. So that is how I felt about this book. And the premise here is that our main character, Hollis, her husband recently passed away and she's dealing with a lot of grief. So she wants to do a 5-star weekend where she invites 4 friends from different phases of her life. I believe it's childhood, college, like kind of when her kids are growing up, and then right now while she's going through this grief. So she invites all 4 of those friends to her house on Nantucket for the weekend, and they have a 5-star weekend. There is lots of drama and gossip, and it's pretty much these 40, 50-year-old women coming together for a weekend. And the things I did like about this book were the summer vibes. Of course, Ellen Hildebrand is the queen of that, and it wasn't like, it was kind of a very specific type of summer vibe, very like hostess-esque and tablescape, and describing elegant food and outfits and the way rooms were decorated, and very much so like Martha Stewart hostess vibes. Like that is what the main character gives. So that was the summer vibes that I got. And then I also really liked the way that the story was written. It was almost like it was a kind of like a fly on the wall watching everyone, but also in everyone's brain. Like you knew what all of the women were thinking at all times. So that was a really unique perspective and point of view and way to write the story. And I thought that was fun. But other than that, it's like a pretty like brainless, you don't have to think too much beach read. And that I guess was a little bit boring for me. Like it didn't hook me in at any point. Like I never was like, oh my gosh, wow, what a great story. It never got to that point for me. And I do think maybe one issue or one reason why I never got there was because it is like a middle-aged woman book, definitely a mom book, like all the experiences and romances and relationships focused on older women, which I clearly, like, I'm not there yet. So maybe that's why I didn't love it. Like, I definitely think my mom would like this book more than I did. But it wasn't bad, just not amazing for me. Next up is a book that I finally loved for the month, and that is Carrie Soto Is Back by Taylor Jenkins Reid. If you know me, you know that Taylor Jenkins Reid is one of my favorite authors of all time. I love her books, specifically Evelyn Hugo and Daisy Jones and the Six. This book I loved as well, but not quite as much as those two. I gave it a 4-star, where those are 5 stars. But I loved this book. I thought it was perfect. I just think TJR does the best when it comes to telling stories. Like, she writes such good stories. They're so fascinating and interesting, and I love the women that are at the center of most of her stories, and this is just a type of book that I can't put down, and I loved it. So the first thing that I really enjoyed about this book was the tennis. There was a lot of tennis. To me, the book kind of felt like one big match. Oh, I don't think I told you what this book is about. Okay, so Carrie Soto is like the world's best tennis player, but she is retired, and there is another up-and-coming tennis player on the scene who is going to take over her records, and she simply cannot let that happen, so she tries to come out of retirement to regain her records. So the story is pretty much about her comeback, but there also is bits of her childhood and how she became the tennis player that she was, and all of that. It's pretty much just her journey through tennis and her finding herself, and there's a beautiful father-daughter relationship because he is her coach. But yeah, I love the tennis. There was so much strategy, and you were really like in the weeds with Carrie Soto on her thoughts and what she was gonna do and how she trained, and it was just like really fascinating and reminded me of Check and Mate, where you're very much in the brains of the chess players and you're like seeing why they do each move, and I don't know, it was like very like sporty, technical strategy, which I really enjoyed. And like I said before, I loved the father-daughter relationship. It was really touching. It made me cry at points, and I love Carrie Soto's journey, like finding herself, and that was a lot about what the book was. It was like tennis and Carrie's journey. And things that I didn't like, or not that I didn't like, but why this book isn't a 5-star like the other TJR books, is I think that this was a bit of a simpler story. Like, it just didn't get as detailed. There's not as many characters. There's not as much going on. Whereas I feel like in those other 2 books, it is these like massive interconnected stories, so many relationships, so many romances, so many people and things and whatever. This is a bit simpler, still really good, but it just didn't like hit me as emotionally hard as those other ones did, just because, like I said, there's like less going on, but still amazing. I loved it. 4 stars. I would highly, highly, highly recommend. I also think it's a great summer read because there's lots of tennis and outdoor and sunshine and California. The next book I read was Listen for the Lie by Amy Tintera. I feel like this is a very popular mystery thriller at the moment. I've been seeing it everywhere, and okay, yeah, it's a Good Morning America book club choice. So I wanted to read it because I love a good thriller and I've been seeing it everywhere, and I really did love it. I gave it a 4-star, just a perfect 4-star for me. And in this book, we are following Lucy, who was accused of murdering her best friend, I think it was 5 years ago. And we follow her perspective throughout the book. And then the other perspective in the book is a crime podcast, which is investigating the murder that Lucy is accused of. So those are the 2 perspectives, the podcast, and you're like actually reading it as it would be told. I have heard that this is a great audiobook listen. I decided to read it just because I prefer physically reading over listening to audiobooks, but I bet it would be great because I'm sure it would just like read the podcast to you. But I enjoyed reading it as well. I thought it was a really like fun mixed media type of book. And then the thriller itself like was a very solid mystery. I was on the edge of my seat. I really was invested. I wanted to know what happened. It was a quick read. The chapters were short. It just like had all the makings of a good thriller, and it had a very unique tone. It was kind of like funny and sarcastic, and it was just kind of a refreshing thriller, and I have nothing bad to say about it. If you want a good, classic, easy to read, enthralling thriller, I would highly recommend. Also, it's a bit unique, so that's always fun. Next, I read Not in Love by Ali Hazelwood, which you guys, I kind of hated. I hate to say I hated a book, but I really didn't like this one. Let me check what I gave it as a rating. I think I gave it like a 2.5 or 275. Okay, so before I get into this, let me just say that I have recently become a big Ali Hazelwood fan. Like, I read 4 of her books this year so far, and I have loved all of them, like 4 stars or above. So I was very excited to read this book. I actually included it in a reading more books from my favorite authors vlog because Ali Hazelwood is one of my favorite authors. So I had very high expectations of this, and I was definitely let down a little bit. And this is Ali Hazelwood's first erotic novel, I think. She calls it an erotic novel. Like, in the beginning, she left a little author's note where she was saying that it's different than her classic rom-com, it's more erotic. So that was definitely something to think about when I went into it, but I thought I would like that because I do like a spicy, sexy book. But I think like the sexy, spicy combined with like the brainy, quirky, weird way that Ali Hazelwood writes, like it didn't do it for me. It kind of left me feeling uncomfortable and cringy, and that was one issue I had. But then the main issue I had with this book is that I felt zero connection, like literally zip, zero, nada, literally nothing. I was reading about how this was supposed to be an epic love. They can't imagine living without each other, like blah, 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 blah. And I was feeling nothing. Like, I did not believe in it at all. It was so bad that I had to skim some of this book. Like, not bad, but I was so uninterested that I had to skim some of this book, which I never do. I completely missed him confessing her love to her, like saying, I love you. I missed it because they referenced it later on, and I was like, wait, when did he do that? So I was definitely very checked out on this book, but I wanted to finish it because of the vlog, and I was already far into it, but I really probably should have DNF'd this. I did not enjoy it. I was dreading it. I was kind of miserable at the end, and I didn't even read the epilogue. I always read the epilogue, but I just like didn't care at all. So honestly, the more I talk about it, the more I think it might even be, like, I should maybe rate it lower than a 275. But I don't want to be too negative. I don't want to rant on and on and on. So this one was a no for me, but let's move on from it. Next up is Summer Romance by Annabelle Monaghan. I gave this book a 3.75 star rating, which I feel like I give 3.75s a lot, and that just means like I enjoyed it, but I didn't love it, and I have to be able to say I loved a book to give it 4 stars. So I can't say that with my whole chest about this book. That's why it's not a 4 star, but it was still very good, very enjoyable. Like, it's a positive 3.75 for me. It's like the definition of a cute, easy, cutesy summer read. Obviously, like it says, summer romance. And in this book, we are following a single mom. She is recently divorced, and her mother also recently passed away. So she's dealing with a lot of things: parenthood, grief, like finding herself. She's a little bit lost. Like, she's very lost. And she meets a man who kind of like reawakens her old self in herself. And she kind of has this epic summer romance, and that is where the story goes. And it was very cute, set in a coastal Connecticut town, I believe, and it had really great vibes. I liked the summer vibes, but it wasn't my favorite type of summer vibe. Like, I don't know how to put that into words, but I read Same Time Next Summer by the same author, and I prefer those summer vibes. Maybe it's because the main character was like younger, and it was kind of more of what I relate summer to, whereas in this book, the summer vibes were very much like family fun days, like canoeing as a family and barbecuing as a family and having like luau parties for your little kids and like summer camp, like that kind of energy. So the summer vibes were a little bit different, but still there. And then I liked the romance, but it wasn't everything to me. Like, I didn't really deeply believe in their love, but it was cute and it was sweet, and it was a really good, like, short and sweet summer read. I would definitely recommend. I love the way that this author writes. It's also a bit of like a fiction book following the main character as well as a romance. It's very much about her finding herself. I'm realizing that's something that Annabelle Monaghan does. I think her books have a central romance, but then they also have like some sort of journey for the main character. And I also have seen that a lot of people really like connected to this book deeply and emotionally and cried about it. And I could really see that because there were deeper things going on here. But for me, it was more of like a surface level good time book. Like, I didn't connect super deeply, and I think that's why it's not a 4, but cute read. And I would recommend for the summer. Next, I read The Women by Kristen Hanna, and this was my favorite book of the month by far. This was a 5 star for me, and I just loved it. It is a historical fiction that follows a young woman in the Vietnam War. She is a nurse, and then it also follows her when she comes home from the war and how kind of life has changed and how she moves on from her experience in the war. And the best way I can describe this book, honestly, any Kristen Hanna book, is that it's just an epic story. Like, there is so much going on in here. There's so much detail. There's so much emotion and depth and detail and history and like so many characters, and like the amount of information that went into this book just blows my mind. It's truly like a work of art. It's a masterpiece. It is so good. If you like historical fiction, you gotta read this book. It's also very interesting. I feel like Kristen Hanna always does a great job of highlighting something in history that maybe doesn't have a lot of attention, and in this book it is the women in the war. And they said throughout this book that a lot of times after the Vietnam War, people would say to women weren't in Vietnam, and the women would be like, yes, they were, I was there. And people refuse to acknowledge that the women were in the war. And that is kind of Kristen Hanna's entire point about this book. It's to remember the women in the Vietnam War. I thought it was so good. It's so enthralling, engrossing. Like, I really don't know what else to say besides that this is a beautiful, epic, such well-written story. It made me cry. It made me happy. It took me on a whole journey. And also one thing I did love about this book is that it took place over a very long time, like decades of our main character's life. And you saw her war experience, you saw her post-war experience. There was just so much to learn. And if you want more of my detailed thoughts, you can check out my reading vlog where I share lots of thoughts about this one. Next up, I read Everything I Know About Love by Dolly Alderton. Actually, I listened to this book on audiobook almost entirely. I maybe read like 2 physical chapters. I thought it was really well done on audio. I would really recommend listening to it as an audiobook because she adds like character. I think Dolly is the one narrating, and she adds a lot of character and funniness and energy and personality that just adds to her stories that she shares in here. I gave this book a 4-star. I really enjoyed it. Everyone says that this is a book you should read in your 20s, and I totally agree. There are so many lessons in here and just experiences that you can relate to. I don't relate to everything. I don't think anyone could possibly relate to everything in here, but I think that there will be something that everyone relates to, and I think that's why this book is so special. There are just some chapters and things discussed in here that made me so nostalgic, and I can only imagine how much more so it would be if you were like Dolly's age, because I think I'm about 10 years younger than her. So if you're her age, like pretty much a classic millennial, I feel like so many references in here will be perfect for you, and you'll be so nostalgic for college and your partying days and friendship and, you know, first discovering instant messaging. Like, she talks about all of this stuff, and it was very funny. Like, I found myself giggling out loud a lot, but it also had a very much emotional, deeper, heartfelt side. Like, I was honestly touched at many times, and I didn't cry, but I like kind of had that feeling in the back of your eyes, you know, when you're like about to cry. I had that feeling multiple times. So I feel like it was beautiful, sweet, funny, touching. Like, that's how I would describe this. And it's pretty much Dolly just sharing stories about her life. It goes in mixed order. I would say mainly it's chronological, but you also do some hopping around, and it's a little hard to follow like the timeline exactly, but you don't really need to follow the timeline. It's just kind of like the bits and pieces of her life that come to be like everything she knows about love. And the main point in this book that Dolly makes is that she has learned everything she knows about love from her long-term female friendships. So if you have fabulous friends in your life, I think that this book would mean even more to you. All around, it was a good time. It was enjoyable. I feel like Dolly lived such a like crazy, funny life with so many stories and anecdotes and lessons to learn. It was a really cool read. That's pretty much it. I definitely enjoyed it. I do think I might be a little bit bored if I physically read it instead of listening to it, but listening to it was wonderful. The next book I read was Heartstopper, Volume 1 by Alice Oseman. So I've been seeing this around, and Sarah Caroli posted, I think, last month in her wrap up, and she talked all about Heartstoppers like all month. And I was like, I need to read it. It sounded like something I would love, and I really did. It is super short and sweet. It's like maybe 200, 300 pages, and it took me maybe 45 minutes, 30 minutes to go through. So if you are looking for just like a short, sweet, cute story, this is it. And it was really fun to read a different style book. Honestly, I never really read comics or graphic novels as a kid, so I kind of had to teach myself like how to read the pictures or like what order the bubbles go in. I mean, it was very easy to learn, but it was still fun, and it was like a fun, different way to read. It kind of made me feel like a kid again, and the story in here is so sweet. It is 2 boys in high school who fall in love. Shy and soft-hearted Charlie Springs sits next to rugby player Nick Nelson in class one morning, and pretty much the rest is history. And it left off on a cliffhanger, so I definitely want to read the 2nd volume. And it was just like so sweet and cute. It literally had me like smiling at the pages, giddy, butterflies, in really a short story. So if you want to feel like that warm fuzziness, just go ahead and read this. I would definitely recommend. And I gave it a 5-star. I mean, I don't really know how to rate a graphic novel, but I felt nothing but joy and happiness while reading this. So it was a 5-star for me. and I can't wait to read the other ones. There's also a TV show, so that should be fun. And the last book that I read in the month of June, the 10th book, was The Housemaid Is Watching. So this is the third book in the Housemaid series by Frida McFadden. The first one was The Housemaid, and the second book was The Housemaid's Secret, I believe. And I gave this book a 3-star. So I read the first two. I loved the first one. I gave it a 5-star, but the second one, I didn't really enjoy that much. I think I maybe gave it a 3 or a 3.5. So honestly, like, I wasn't expecting too much out of the third, because the way I feel about Frida now is like, I don't think they're the most excellent books. I don't think they're that well written. I think that's the point. They're supposed to be very easy to digest, but I just don't think they're that amazing. But I did want a 10th book of the month that was like short, easy to read, quick, bingeable, something that I could pretty much accomplish quickly. So I saw everyone reading this book. It's the third book in the series. I read the other two, so I was like, hey, I should read it. And I thought it was pretty good, like solid. If I think on a surface level, it was good, easy to read, like fine. But if I think anything deeper, I'm like, oh, it was not that good. Like, I don't even know like what was happening. There wasn't anything super thrilling, super mystery. Everything that was revealed was such a letdown. I was like, really? That is what this whole thing is about? I would say like 50–60% of the book was just like family drama. So pretty much in this book, we were following Millie, who is the main character in the other two books, and she is married and she has kids, and she moves to a new house in the suburbs, and she has neighbors all around her, and pretty much everyone is like a little bit suspicious and creepy, and people are watching her, and she hears noises in the house, and there's just a lot of like suspiciousness going on. One of my major pet peeves about this book is every chapter Frida ended it with like a question or like a statement where Millie would be like, and I was beginning to think that we shouldn't have moved to this house. I was beginning to think that my husband was lying all along. And I was thinking even more that we shouldn't move to this house. I was like, you don't need to tell us, we know. Like, that is pretty much what was happening. Lots of telling, not a lot of showing. And then everything that was revealed was so lackluster. But I did have a good time. That's why it's not in the 2s. Like, overall, I enjoyed myself. It was fine, like, whatever. 3-star. Also, something that revived it a little bit is that the ending, or not even the ending, the epilogue was like a little bit surprising and a little bit exciting. So I just bumped it up to a 3 because they are easy to read, fast, quick, bingeable books. So that gets them a point above the 2s. And that was the final book I read in the month of June. Okay, and that is it for me for this video. Those are the 10 books I read in the month of June. Let me know if you guys have read any of these books, what you thought about them, what you read in June. Tell me actually what your favorite book in the month of June is. Maybe I will read it in the next coming months, especially if it is summer themed, summer focused. I am loving all of the summer books at the moment. So that is it for me for now. Thank you guys so much for watching. Don't forget to subscribe for more book content, and I'll see you in the next one.